The rain didn't just fall on Norfolk, Virginia. It assaulted it. It was a Tuesday evening in November, and the Atlantic Ocean seemed determined to reclaim the coastline. At the Harbor Point Medical Center, the windows of the 7th floor intensive care unit, ICU, vibrated with a low, menacing hum. Outside, the world was a blurred watercolor of charcoal clouds and angry, horizontal sheets of water. Inside, however, the air was conditioned to a crisp, sterile 68 degrees, smelling of antiseptic wipes and filtered oxygen. Harbor Point was not just a hospital. It was an institution woven into the fabric of a military town. Located just miles from the world's largest naval base, its corridors were often filled with as many uniforms as scrubs. It was a place where structure, hierarchy, and protocol were worshipped with religious fervor. At the altar of this temple stood Dr. Ethan Carver. Dr. Carver was 42 years old, with the kind of jawline that inspired confidence in donors and a resume that intimidated peers. He was the chief of the ICU, a man who viewed medicine not as an art, but as a precise engineering challenge. To Carver, the human body was a machine, and he was the master mechanic. He trusted data. He trusted the digital readout of an arterial line. He trusted the rhythmic whoosh click of the Puritan Bennett 980 ventilators. He did not trust variables he couldn't control. "Dr. Carver," a resident said, holding out a tablet, "Bedfor's vitals are drifting. Pressure is soft, 90/60. Carver didn't look up from his own screen at the central station. "Adjust the Leviphed drip by 0.05. Check his fluid balance. It's just the sedation peaking. He's fine." "Right. Understood." The resident hurried away. Carver adjusted his glasses. He felt good. The unit was full. 20 beds, 20 critically ill patients ranging from post-surgical recoveries to severe respiratory failure cases. But everything was green. The monitors were singing their harmonious, synchronized beeps. It was a symphony of controlled chaos, and he was the conductor. At the far end of the nursing station, however, sat a variable Carver hadn't figured out yet. Nora Kane had been hired 3 weeks ago to cover the graveyard shift. She was an anomaly in Harbor Point's ecosystem. Most of the staff were young, fresh out of nursing school, eager to please and terrified of Carver. Nora was different. She was in her late 30s, perhaps older, with hair pulled back in a severe functional bun that offered no style, only utility. But it was her arms that drew the eyes of the staff in the break room. When she rolled up her scrub sleeves to wash her hands, the scars were visible. Ropes of pale, jagged tissue twisted around her forearms. There was a burn mark near her collarbone that disappeared under her scrub top. She didn't hide them, nor did she flaunt them. They were just facts of her geography. "She gives me the creeps," Nurse Jessica whispered to Dr. Carver, leaning over the counter while pretending to check a chart. "She never talks, never complains about the schedule. And the way she walks, it's like she's trying not to make a sound." Carver glanced at Nora. She was currently checking the vent settings on bed 9, a retired heavy equipment operator with COPD. Her movements were economic. No wasted energy. She moved with a stillness that felt out of place in the frantic energy of a civilian ICU. "As long as she follows my orders, Jessica, I don't care if she's a ghost," Carver murmured, typing a note. "Human Resources vetted her. Her references are classified or redacted, which is annoying but typical for people coming out of private contracting work. Probably worked on an oil rig or some embassy clinic." "Classified?" Jessica raised an eyebrow. "For a nurse?" "It's Norfolk," Carver dismissed. "Half the janitors have security clearance. Just keep an eye on the telemetry." Carver returned his attention to the storm raging outside. The lights in the hallway flickered once. A collective gasp went through the nurses' station. The hum of the ventilation system dipped, then surged back. "Grid is unstable," Carver noted, checking his watch. "Maintenance said the backup diesels are primed. We have 3 layers of redundancy. We're fine." He believed it. He believed in the redundancy. He believed that in a modern, Tier 1 trauma center, entropy was a myth. Across the room, Nora Kane stopped what she was doing. She didn't look at the lights. She looked at the floor. She felt the vibration of the building change. The subtle frequency of the electrical current running through the walls had shifted. She walked over to the supply cart. Without asking anyone, she took 3 extra ambu bags, manual resuscitators, and hung them on the hooks behind the three most critical patients' beds. "Nora?" Jessica called out. "What are you doing? Housekeeping just stocked those carts. You're cluttering the rooms." Nora turned. Her eyes were a piercing pale gray. They didn't look at Jessica. They scanned the room, assessing exit vectors and sight lines. "The air pressure dropped," Nora said. Her voice was low, raspy, like gravel moving underwater. "The storm is intensifying. If the grid takes a hit, the switch over to the generators takes 10 seconds. Patients usually panic in the dark. I want the bags ready." Carver overheard this and chuckled dryly. "Ms. Kane, our generator transfer switch is instantaneous. It's a solid-state system. There is no 10 seconds. Please don't spread anxiety among the staff. We are perfectly safe." Nora held his gaze for a second longer than was comfortable. "Equipment fails, Doctor. Gravity doesn't." She went back to bed 9. Carver shook his head. "Drama queen," he muttered. "This is a hospital, not a bunker." 10 minutes later, the concept of safety would be erased from Dr. Carver's vocabulary. The storm outside unleashed a fury that defied the forecast. A microburst, a localized column of sinking air within a thunderstorm, slammed into the power substation 3 blocks away. Inside the ICU, there was no sound of the explosion. There was just a sudden, violent snap from the ceiling panels. Then, the world ended. The darkness was absolute. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was the sudden, suffocating absence of the hum. For years, the background noise of the hospital, the whir of fans, the pump of pistons, the electronic buzz, had been the soundtrack of Dr. Carver's life. Now, silence. "Generators!" Carver barked into the blackness, his voice cracking slightly. "Wait for the kick-in." 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. Usually the massive diesel engines in the basement would roar to life, and the red emergency outlets would flare with power. The monitors would reboot. The ventilators would continue their rhythmic push and pull. 4 seconds. 5 seconds. "Dr. Carver?" Jessica's voice was trembling, coming from somewhere near the central station. The screens are all off." Carver stood up, knocking over his coffee cup. It crashed, the sound deafening in the quiet room. He reached for his phone, fumbling to turn on the flashlight. "It's a glitch in the transfer switch. It has to be." The beam of his phone cut through the darkness. It revealed a scene of frozen terror. Nurses were standing like statues, hands over their mouths. The monitors were black mirrors, but the most terrifying sound was beginning to emerge. It was the sound of 20 patients beginning to suffocate. The ventilators had internal batteries, yes. They should be beeping, running on reserve power. But they were silent. The screens were dead. The catastrophic power surge hadn't just tripped the grid. It had fried the sensitive logic boards of the equipment plugged into the wall. "My patient!" a young nurse screamed from bed 6. "He's not breathing. The vent stopped." "Mine too!" shouted another. Carver felt a cold hand grip his heart. This wasn't possible. The surge protectors, the UPS systems. It was statistically impossible for everything to fail simultaneously. "Code blue!" someone yelled. "Code blue bed 6. Code blue bed 10. Stop!" Carver shouted, trying to regain control. "Everybody calm down. Use the protocols." But what was the protocol for a total system failure? Carver's mind raced through algorithms, flowcharts, and textbooks. Check power source, check patient, reboot system. He ran to bed 4. He pressed the power button on the ventilator. Nothing. Dead weight. The patient, a young man with acute respiratory distress syndrome, ARDS, was beginning to thrash. His chest heaved, fighting against the plastic tube in his throat that was now blocked by a closed valve in the dead machine. "I can't see!" Jessica was crying. "I can't find the equipment." The darkness was disorienting. The layout of the room seemed to have changed. Panic is a contagion. It moves faster than a virus. Carver felt it grabbing him. He was the chief. He had to know what to do. But he was an architect of systems, and the system had collapsed. He stood in the center of the unit, swinging his flashlight beam wildly, watching his kingdom dissolve into chaos. "Get the flashlights," Carver ordered, but his voice lacked authority. "Call maintenance," Why aren't the phones working? The lines are dead, doctor. Carver looked at the patient in bed 4. The man's face was turning purple in the harsh LED light of the phone. He was drowning in air. I'm going to lose them, Carver thought, the horror dawning on him. I'm going to lose all 20 of them in the next 5 minutes. The crushing weight of responsibility paralyzed him. He knew the medicine, but he didn't know the war. And this was no longer medicine. This was a siege. Suddenly a beam of light, far brighter and steadier than a phone, cut across the room like a laser. It didn't wobble. It didn't shake. It swept the room with predatory precision, illuminating the faces of the terrified staff one by one. Clear the airway, a voice said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command, spoken with a flat, terrifying calmness that sliced through the panic. The light landed on Dr. Carver's face, blinding him for a moment. Then it moved to bed 4. Nora Kane was there. She had a tactical flashlight clipped to her shoulder, leaving both hands free. She had already disconnected the dead ventilator tubing from the patient's endotracheal tube. Disconnect the machines, Nora said. Now. What? Jessica stammered. The vents are dead valves, Nora said, her hands moving in a blur as she snapped a manual ambu bag onto the patient's airway. She squeezed the bag. Whoosh. The patient's chest rose. If you leave them connected, they suffocate. Disconnect, bag, now. Carver blinked, his brain struggling to catch up. We can't. We need to wait for the power. Doctor. Nora didn't look at him. She was watching the patient's chest rise and fall, counting the rhythm. There is no power. There is no backup. Look at the panel. She pointed her light briefly at the wall. The emergency outlets, which should be glowing red, were dark. The surge had bypassed the breakers. It was a hard kill of the electrical system. This isn't a glitch, Nora said, squeezing the bag again. Whoosh. This is a total blackout. We are strictly manual. She looked up, her scarred face illuminated by the harsh uplight of her shoulder lamp. She looked like a demon, or an angel of death. Stop panicking, she told the room. Panic kills faster than hypoxia. Listen to my voice. Carver stood frozen. He was the chief. This was his unit, but his legs wouldn't move. He watched as the strange nurse with the scars took the center stage, and for the first time in his career, he felt utterly obsolete. The chaos in the ICU was a physical force, a swirling storm of fear. But Nora Kane stood in the center of it like a rock in a river. Jessica, grab the bag for bed 6, Nora ordered. She didn't ask, she directed. Mark, take bed 8. Sarah, bed 10, move. The nurses, paralyzed moments ago, responded to the direct commands. It was instinctual. When the alpha speaks with absolute certainty, the pack follows. I don't have a flashlight, Mark yelled. Under the counter, crash cart, drawer 3. Nora fired back without looking up. There are mag lights. Get them. Tape them to your shoulders or hold them in your teeth. I need hands free. Dr. Carver finally snapped out of his trance. The shock was receding, replaced by a defensive anger. Nurse Kane, you can't just... We need to assess the situation before we act. I have assessed it, Nora said. She was currently bagging the patient in bed 4 with her left hand while checking his pulse with her right. We have 20 ventilator-dependent patients. We have 6 nurses and 1 doctor. We cannot manually ventilate 20 people indefinitely. We don't have enough hands. She turned her cold gray eyes to Carver. We have to triage, now. Triage? Carver balked. These are ICU patients. They are all critical. We don't triage in an ICU. We treat everyone. Not tonight, Nora said. Tonight this isn't a hospital, it's a mass casualty event. And you're the commanding officer, doctor, so make the call. Carver stared at the patients. To choose who got a dedicated nurse to squeeze air into their lungs and who didn't? It was unethical. It was impossible. I can't make that choice. The power will be back any minute. The smell, Nora said. What? Smell the air, doctor. Carver sniffed. Under the antiseptic there was a sharp, acrid sting, burnt plastic, ozone. That's melted insulation, Nora explained. The main conduits are fried. The backup generators aren't sending power because the lines carrying the power are severed. The lights aren't coming back on in 5 minutes. Maybe not for hours. She paused, squeezing the bag. 1,000. 1,000. Squeeze. If we try to save everyone with half the staff we need, we lose everyone. Fatigue sets in after 20 minutes of manual bagging. You'll get sloppy. Patients will build up CO2. They will code. Nora's tactical assessment was brutal, educational, and undeniably correct. In a resource-poor environment, which the high-tech ICU had suddenly become, you had to allocate assets. Group the patients, Nora commanded, stepping into the void left by Carver's hesitation. Move the beds. I want a concentric circle, most critical in the center, least critical on the perimeter. We can't move patients with lines and tubes in the dark, Jessica protested. You can, Nora said. And you will. Listen to me. We are going to implement a daisy chain ventilation protocol. The staff looked at her blankly. Even Carver was confused. Doctor, Nora said, you take beds 1 and 2. Position them head to head. You stand between them. Left hand squeezes bag for patient 1. Right hand squeezes bag for patient 2. Alternate the rhythm. Squeeze left. Release. Squeeze right. Release. It conserves energy and allows one person to keep 2 people alive. It was brilliant. It was a field technique used in medevac choppers when space and hands were limited. It's risky, Carver stammered. Infection control is irrelevant if they are dead, Nora cut him off. Do it. Slowly, the ICU began to transform. Under the erratic beams of flashlights, the beds were unlocked and rolled. The squeak of wheels on linoleum replaced the screams. Nora moved like a shadow. She didn't run, she glided. She checked the seal on the masks. She checked the chest rise. She corrected a nurse's grip. Don't squeeze the whole bag, Sarah. Just half. He's small. You'll blow a lung. Gentle. Like a handshake. Dr. Carver found himself standing between 2 beds, sweating profusely in the cooling air. He held 2 plastic bags, huge pulsating lungs in his hands. Squeeze left, squeeze right. He looked across the circle at Nora. She was handling the most difficult case, bed 4, while simultaneously directing a nursing assistant on how to check blood pressure manually with a cuff and stethoscope, a skill many modern staff had let rust in favor of digital machines. How? Carver whispered, the rhythm of his hands becoming hypnotic. How does she know how to do this? It wasn't just medical knowledge, it was the command presence, the way she prioritized threats, the way she had predicted the grid failure. Nora finished stabilizing her patient and walked to the center of the room. She pulled a marker from her pocket and wrote on the glass wall of the nursing station, illuminated by a lantern. Priorities: ventilation, air, temperature, body heat, security. Security? Carver asked, his voice strained from the physical effort of bagging. Why security? Nora turned to the window. The rain was lashing against it, black and violent. But she wasn't looking at the rain. She was looking at the reflection of the hallway behind them. Because, Nora said softly, so only Carver could hear. The backup generators didn't just fail, Doctor. I heard the relays click. They tried to engage and then they were cut. Cut? You mean a fuse blew? No, Nora said, her fingers tracing the scar on her wrist. I know the sound of a system failing, and I know the sound of a system being murdered. Someone killed the power. Carver felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Who would do that? That's what I'm going to find out, Nora said. Keep bagging. Don't stop. If the rhythm breaks, they die. She unclipped her flashlight and moved toward the locked door of the electrical maintenance closet at the back of the unit. Where are you going? Carver hissed. You can't leave the floor. I'm not leaving, Nora said. I'm securing the perimeter. Because if the power was cut intentionally, the blackout is just the opening move. She disappeared into the shadows of the hallway, moving with the silent lethality of a predator, leaving Dr. Carver holding the lives of 2 strangers in his shaking hands. The hospital was no longer a place of healing. It was a target, and Nora Kane was the only weapon they had. Nora Kane stood before the heavy steel door labeled Electrical Authorized Personnel Only. The hallway was pitch black, save for the emergency exit signs casting a ghostly green pallor on the wet floor. The air here was stagnant, heavy with the pressure of the storm outside. Most nurses would have pounded on the door. Most would have shouted for maintenance. Nora did neither. She knelt, directing the beam of her shoulder light into the gap between the door and the frame. She wasn't looking for a key. She was looking for structural weakness. Finding none, she reached into the deep pocket of her cargo scrubs, a deviation from the standard uniform that she had insisted on wearing and which Dr. Carver had previously mocked. She pulled out a heavy-duty pair of trauma shears and a slender, hardened steel probe she used for checking equipment valves. With a precise, jarring motion, she wedged the shears into the latch mechanism. It wasn't a lock-picking move, it was a breach. She applied torque, the muscles in her scarred arms cording under the strain. There was a groan of protesting metal, a sharp ping, and the door swung inward. Nora stepped inside and swept the room with her light. It was a junction room, filled with thick conduits, breaker panels, and the hum of residual static. But it was silent. The automatic transfer switch, ATS, the brain that tells the hospital to switch from grid power to generator power, hung open. Nora approached it. Her breath hitched, just for a fraction of a second. This wasn't a burnout. A burnout leaves scorch marks, melted plastic, chaotic black soot. This was clean. 3 thick copper cables, the main feeders from the generator bank, had been severed. The cuts were bright and shiny, indicating they were fresh, and they were angled perfectly. Bolt cutters, Nora whispered to the empty room. Hydraulic ones. Insulated. She ran a gloved finger over the cut. This wasn't a disgruntled employee with a pair of pliers. To cut a live cable of this gauge required specific, expensive tools and the knowledge of exactly where to cut to disable the system without electrocuting yourself. Someone had come in here, likely minutes before the storm peaked, and prepped the kill. They waited for the grid to flicker, then severed the backup line, ensuring the hospital would go dark and stay dark. Sabotage. The word hung in her mind, heavy and cold. But why? Hospitals were off limits in almost every engagement she had ever fought in. Strategically, they were low-value targets unless the target wasn't the building, unless the target was inside. Nora turned her attention to the secondary panel, the emergency lighting system. It operated on a separate loop, fed by a bank of lead-acid batteries in the basement, designed to power only the exit signs and the red pathway lights. Not enough for the vents, she muttered, calculating volts and amps in her head, but maybe enough for the eyes. She couldn't fix the generators. The cables were too short to splice back together without spare wire and hours of work. But she could steal power. Working quickly, Nora stripped the insulation off a nearby auxiliary cable using her shears. She found the lead flowing to the ICU's central monitoring station. It was dead. She looked at the emergency lighting circuit. It was live. Risky, she murmured. Fire hazard. She paused. Upstairs, Dr. Carver and 6 terrified nurses were manually pumping air into 20 dying people in the dark. If she didn't get the monitors back on, they were flying blind. They wouldn't know if a patient's heart stopped until it was too late. Worth it. Nora clamped the stripped wires together, using the rubber handle of her shears to twist the copper strands. Sparks showered down, illuminating her face in harsh, flickering strobes. She ignored the heat. She ignored the danger. She twisted, secured the connection with a roll of medical tape she kept on her belt, and stepped back. A low hum started in the wall. "Come on," she hissed. Back in the ICU, the atmosphere had shifted from panic to a grueling physical purgatory. "Switch," Dr. Carver gasped. He and Jessica swapped hands. His right hand was cramping so badly his fingers curled into a claw. The manual resuscitator bags, the ambu bags, required a firm, rhythmic squeeze every 5 to 6 seconds. It sounded easy, but doing it for 20 minutes straight, with the resistance of a human lung pushing back, was like squeezing a tennis ball thousands of times. The ICU was heating up. Without AC, the body heat of the staff and patients, combined with the humidity of the storm, turned the sealed room into a sauna. Sweat dripped from Carver's nose onto his mask. "Dr. Carver," Jessica whispered, her voice tight with exhaustion. "Bed 6. I think he's fighting me." Carver stumbled over. In the dim light of the flashlights taped to the nurse's shoulders, he saw the patient bucking. The man was conscious, terrified, with a tube down his throat. Unable to speak, feeling like he was suffocating because the rhythm of the nurse's hand didn't match the rhythm of his own desire to breathe. He's air hungry, Carver said, trying to remember the physiology. You're squeezing too slow. Speed up. I can't, Jessica cried. My arm is burning. If you don't speed up, he panics. If he panics, he burns oxygen. If he burns oxygen, he codes, Carver snapped, though he knew he was being unfair. He grabbed the bag from her. Let me. Carver squeezed. 1, 2, squeeze. The patient settled. But now Carver was bagging 3 patients in a rotation. He was the chief of medicine, a man of intellect and strategy, reduced to a mechanical pump. He felt a wave of despair. We can't do this. It's been 30 minutes. We have hours to go. We're going to fail. Suddenly, a beep. Then another. The central monitoring station at the desk flickered. The screens washed in static, then stabilized. Bright, colorful lines traced across the black void. Heart rates, oxygen saturation levels, blood pressure. The monitors, Mark yelled. They're back. Did the power return? Jessica asked, looking at the ceiling lights. They were still dark. No, a voice came from the doorway. Just the eyes. Nora stood there. She was covered in dust, and there was a smudge of grease on her cheek. She looked less like a nurse and more like a mechanic who had just crawled out of an engine block. I hot-wired the telemetry into the emergency lighting circuit, Nora announced, walking into the room. It's not stable. It might fry in an hour. But for now, we can see who is dying first. She didn't wait for applause. She walked straight to Carver, who was struggling with bed 6. You're doing it wrong, she said flatly. Carver bristled. I am a board-certified pulmonologist, Ms. Kane. I know how to ventilate a patient. You know the theory, Nora said, reaching out. But you're fighting the lung compliance. Look at his chest. She pointed. The patient's stomach was distending slightly. You're squeezing too hard and too fast, Nora explained, her voice dropping into that educational, instructional tone that demanded attention. You're forcing air past the trachea and into the stomach. Gastric insufflation. In 10 minutes, he'll vomit. If he vomits with that tube in, he aspirates. Then he dies of pneumonia in 2 days, if he doesn't choke now. Carver stared at the patient's stomach. She was right. Here. Nora moved behind him. She didn't push him away. She guided his hands. It's not about force. It's about the seal. Use the CE clamp method with your hand. Thumb and index make a C on the mask. Other 3 fingers make an E on the jaw. Lift the jaw into the mask. Don't push the mask down onto the face. She adjusted his grip. Now, squeeze gently. Feel the resistance. When the lung pushes back, stop. That's the limit. Respect the limit. Carver adjusted. He felt the difference immediately. The airflow was smoother. The patient stopped bucking. The rhythm became a dance, not a wrestling match. Better, Nora said. She stepped back and addressed the room. Listen up. We are burning too many calories. We need a rotation schedule, Marine Corps standard. Marine Corps? Mark asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. 15 minutes on, 5 minutes off, Nora commanded. Hydrate during the off time. If you pass out, you become a patient, and I don't have a bed for you. Dr. Carver, you're on comms. Comms? Carver laughed bitterly. The phones are dead, Nora. Not all of them, Nora said. She pulled a handheld radio from her back pocket. An older, chunky model that looked like a brick. I found this in the security office on my way back. It's a UHF analog radio. The digital network is down, but analog waves don't care about software crashes. She tossed it to him. Go to the roof, she ordered. Signal for help. Tell them we have a code black. Total infrastructure failure. Suspected hostile action. Carver froze. Hostile action? Nora, you think someone did this? Nora walked over to the window, looking down at the storm-lashed parking lot 7 stories below. I don't think, she said softly. I know. The cables were cut, Doctor, and the ambulance bay? Carver joined her at the window. He looked down. The transport ambulance, he said, confused. The one from Norfolk General that was bringing the extra battery packs for the vents. It should be here. It's not, Nora said. And look at the street. The street lights were out for blocks, but in the distance, blocked across the main intersection leading to the hospital, 2 large utility trucks were parked sideways. No lights, no workers, just a barricade. We're boxed in, Nora said. Nobody is coming in, and nobody is getting out. Fear is a cold thing, but realization is colder. Dr. Carver stared at the barricade. His mind, usually so adept at diagnosing diseases, struggled to diagnose the situation. Why? Why would anyone siege a hospital? We have no money, no strategic value. We have someone, Nora corrected. She turned back to the room, scanning the 20 patients. Someone in one of these beds is important. Important enough to kill the power to find them. Or kill them. This is insane, Carver whispered. This is America. This is Virginia. War doesn't check the GPS, doctor, Nora said, checking the pulse of an elderly woman in bed too. It just happens. She gathered the staff in the center of the room. The monitors were beeping steadily now, thanks to her wiring job, providing a comforting rhythmic background noise that slightly lowered the collective blood pressure of the room. Okay, team, Nora said. Her posture had changed. She wasn't slouching. She stood with a terrifying readiness. Situation update. We are isolated. Help is delayed. We have to assume we are on our own until sunrise. Sunrise is 6 hours away. Sarah, the youngest nurse, whimpered. My arms are already shaking. Then we improvise, Nora said. We can't bag 20 people for 6 hours manually. We will lose the rhythm. What choice do we have? Carver asked, gripping the radio Nora had given him. Mechanical advantage, Nora said. We build a lung. Excuse me? Nora pointed to the supply closet. We have suction regulators. We have oxygen flow meters. We have spring-loaded tension arms for the surgical lights. She grabbed a whiteboard marker and drew a quick diagram on the glass wall. It looked like a seesaw. If we can create a lever system, she explained, drawing rapidly, we can use the pressure of the oxygen lines themselves, which are still pressurized from the central tank farm, to drive a piston. The oxygen pushes the piston squeezes the bag. A pneumatic ventilator. It was crude. It was 1950s technology, but the physics were sound. That's theoretically possible, Carver admitted, his engineering brain engaging. But we'd need seals, gaskets. Syringe plungers make great pistons, Nora said, and the rubber tourniquets make great gaskets. I need you to gather parts, lots of them. Me? Carver pointed at himself. You're the best with anatomy, but I bet you're terrible with a screwdriver, Nora said with a faint, grim smile. Actually, no. You go to the roof. Get that signal out. Jessica, you're with me on the build. Mark, you run the bagging rotation. Keep the cadence strict. As the team dispersed, energized by having a plan, Nora grabbed Carver's arm. Her grip was iron. Doctor, she lowered her voice. When you go to the roof, stay low. Don't use your flashlight. Why? Because if they have a spotter on the perimeter, a light on the roof is a signal that someone is active. And if they know we're active, they might decide to stop waiting for the battery banks to die and come inside to finish the job. Carver swallowed hard. He looked at the scarred woman who had transformed from a quiet, creepy employee into a tactical commander. Who are you, Nora? He asked. Really? Nora looked at the scars on her arms, illuminated by the flashing red light of a heart monitor. I was a corpsman, she said, her eyes distant, attached to a SEAL delivery vehicle team. I spent 5 years keeping people alive in places where the world wanted them dead. I thought I left that behind. She looked at the patients, vulnerable, asleep, dependent on thin plastic tubes. Guess I was wrong. She shoved a screwdriver into her belt. Go to the roof, doctor. Make the call. Tell them Broken Arrow at Harbor Point. If they're military, they'll know what it means. Carver nodded and ran toward the stairwell. Nora turned back to the ICU. She had to build a machine to breathe for the dying, while waiting for killers to breach the doors. She looked at the main entrance to the ICU. The double glass doors. Jessica, Nora called out. Yeah? Move the crash carts, Nora said calmly. Put them in front of the doors. Lock the wheels. Why? For the storm. Nora didn't answer. She just started piling equipment, creating a fatal funnel, a barricade. She hoped she wouldn't have to defend it, but hope, she knew, was not a strategy. The roof of Harbor Point Medical Center was a flat expanse of gravel and tar, usually peaceful, currently a war zone of weather. Dr. Ethan Carver burst through the stairwell door and was immediately slammed against the wall by a gust of wind that felt like a physical blow. The rain wasn't falling, it was firing horizontally, stinging his face like birdshot. He gasped, the air sucked from his lungs by the pressure drop. He was 7 stories up, exposed to the full fury of the Atlantic storm. "Stay low," Nora had said. He dropped to his hands and knees. The gravel dug into his palms through his thin scrubs. He was freezing. Hypothermia in these conditions could set in within minutes, clouding judgment, slowing reaction times, the umbles, stumbles, mumbles, fumbles that every doctor learned about in medical school but rarely felt. He crawled toward the HVAC units, seeking shelter behind a massive industrial exhaust fan. The metal casing rattled and groaned, threatening to tear loose. Carver pulled the brick-sized radio from his pocket. He sheltered it with his body, trying to keep the microphone dry. "Mayday!" he shouted over the roar of the wind. "Mayday! This is Harbor Point ICU. Is anyone out there?" Static, a wall of white noise. He fiddled with the knobs. He didn't know radio protocols. He was a man accustomed to fiber-optic internet and instant messaging. This analog box felt like an artifact from another century. "Think, Ethan. Think." Nora had said UHF. She had said Broken Arrow. He turned the dial slowly. Channel 16? No, that was Marine. Channel 9? Emergency. He scanned the frequencies. Suddenly a voice cut through the static. Not a human voice, but a rhythmic, coded burst of data. Then silence. Then a voice. "Sector 4 Patrol. Levee breach reported at..." "Hello!" Carver screamed into the radio. "This is Dr. Carver at Harbor Point. We have 20 critical patients. The power has been cut. We are under siege." Silence. Then, "Unit calling. Identify. You are on a restricted tactical net." "I don't care about your net," Carver yelled, his fear transmuting into a desperate anger. "I am a civilian doctor. We have saboteurs on the premises. Code Broken Arrow." He felt ridiculous saying it. It sounded like a line from a movie. But the voice on the other end changed instantly. The boredom vanished, replaced by a razor-sharp alertness. "Say again, did you say Broken Arrow?" "Yes, the power lines were cut. Ambulances are blocked. We have 20 dying people." "Stand by. Do not transmit." Triangulating. Carver huddled against the metal vent. He looked over the edge of the roof, peering down into the abyss of the parking lot. Through the sheets of rain, he saw them. Down near the delivery bay, where the oxygen tanks were stored, 3 figures were moving. They weren't wearing rain slickers or hospital uniforms. They were dressed in dark, non-reflective gear. They moved with a disturbing synchronicity, stopping, checking corners, advancing. They weren't maintenance workers. They were a fire team. And then, Carver saw what they were doing. They were bypassing the locked service doors. One of them was attaching something to the hinges of the rear entrance. A small flash, a muted thud that barely registered over the thunder. They had breached the perimeter. "Oh my God," Carver whispered. The radio crackled again. "Harbor Point, this is command. We have your signal. We have a thermal lock on your position. Be advised, we show multiple heat signatures entering the ground floor structure. Are you secure?" "No," Carver cried. "I'm on the roof. My staff is on the 7th floor. They're coming up. Listen closely, doctor. Identify the high-value asset." "The what?" "The reason they are there. Who is in your ICU?" Carver's mind raced. He went through the patient list mentally. Bed 1, stroke. Bed 2, pneumonia. Bed 3, car accident. Bed 4. He froze. Bed 4. The man Nora had been fighting to save. The man admitted under the name John Smith with severe trauma from a boating accident. He was older, weather-beaten, with no next of kin listed. The hospital administration had been vague about his insurance, just saying, "Bill the Department of the Navy." Bed 4. Carver whispered. "We have a John Smith, admitted with blast trauma." "That is Admiral Marcus Thorne," the voice on the radio said, the tone grave. "Return Naval Intelligence. Doctor, you are in the middle of a liquidation operation. Do not let them reach the 7th floor. We are spinning up a QRF, quick reaction force, but we are 20 minutes out due to weather. You have to hold the line." "Hold the line? I'm a pulmonologist." Carver screamed. Then you better start thinking like a soldier. Get back to your unit. Lock it down. Out. The radio clicked off. Carver stared at the device. 20 minutes. In a hospital, 20 minutes was an eternity. It was the difference between brain damage and recovery. Now, it was the difference between life and execution. He scrambled back toward the door. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero. But he knew anatomy. He knew where the vulnerable points were. And right now, the hospital was the body, and he had to stop the infection from reaching the heart. While Carver was facing the storm on the roof, Nora Kane was bending the laws of physics in the ICU. The room was a hive of quiet, desperate activity. The temperature had risen to 80 degrees. The floor was slick with humidity. "I need a seal," Nora barked. "It's leaking." She was huddled over a table made of 2 crash carts pushed together. On it lay a monstrosity of tubing, plastic, and metal. She was building a pneumatic ventilator. It was a lesson in basic physics, Boyle's law, and the mechanics of pressure gradients. The hospital's electrical grid was dead, but the oxygen system was purely mechanical. The massive tanks of liquid oxygen outside the building converted liquid to gas, pressurizing the pipes in the walls to 50 psi, pounds per square inch. That pressure was still there, waiting in the wall outlets. Nora realized she could use that 50 psi, not just to provide air to breathe, but as an engine to drive a machine. "Here." Jessica handed her a rubber tourniquet. Nora wrapped it around the junction where a flow meter met a plastic syringe plunger. "Okay, listen to how this works," Nora said, her hands moving fast, teaching as she worked to keep the nurses focused. "This is an interrupter switch mechanism. When I open this valve, oxygen shoots into this syringe." She pointed to a 60 cc syringe she had scavenged. "The pressure pushes the plunger out. The plunger hits this lever arm." She pointed to a metal bar she had ripped from a clipboard, "and the lever squeezes the ambu bag." It was a crude seesaw. Gas pushes piston, piston pushes lever, lever squeezes bag, patient gets air. "But how does it reset?" Mark asked, wiping sweat from his eyes. He was currently bagging 2 patients and looked ready to collapse. "That's the genius part," Nora said, tightening a screw with the tip of her trauma shears. "Elastic recoil. We use heavy rubber bands, tourniquets, to pull the lever back when the pressure releases. It creates a cycle. Push, release, push, release." She connected the device to the wall oxygen port. Hiss. The syringe shot out. Clack. It hit the lever. The lever smashed down onto the ambu bag. Whoosh. Air was forced out. Then, the rubber bands snapped the lever back. Hiss. Clack. Whoosh. Snap. Hiss. Clack. Whoosh. Snap. The machine began to breathe. It was loud, rhythmic, and ugly. But it was breathing. "It works," Jessica breathed, tears welling in her eyes. "Oh my God, it works." "Hook it up to bed 4, Nora ordered. "He has the stiffest lungs. If it can ventilate him, it can ventilate anyone." They carefully connected the tubing. The machine took over. The chest of the man in bed 4, Admiral Thorne, though they didn't know it yet, rose and fell in a perfect mechanical cadence. "That frees up 1 set of hands," Nora said. "We can rotate Mark out. Get him water." "Nora," Mark gasped, sinking into a chair. "You're a genius." "No," Nora said, checking the pressure gauge. "I'm just an engineer of bad situations. This buys us time, but it uses a lot of oxygen. We have maybe 3 hours of tank pressure left." The door to the stairwell flew open. Every head in the ICU snapped toward it. Dr. Carver stumbled in, soaked to the bone, his eyes wide and wild. He locked the door behind him and jammed a chair under the handle. "They're inside," Carver wheezed. 3 men, tactical gear. They breached the loading dock. The silence in the room was heavier than the darkness. "They aren't here for the drugs," Carver said, looking at bed 4. "They're here for him." He pointed at the unconscious man connected to Nora's noisy machine. "That's Admiral Thorne, Naval Intelligence." "Nora, how did you know?" Nora didn't answer. She walked over to the nurses' station and turned off the few battery-powered lanterns they had, plunging the room into near-total darkness, lit only by the flickering red strobes of the emergency alarms from the hallway. "Light discipline," she whispered. "If they can't see us, they can't shoot us." "Shoot us?" Sarah whimpered. "I thought you said no guns." I said we don't have guns, Nora said. She moved to the crash cart. Dr. Carver, how long until help arrives? 20 minutes. Maybe more with the storm. They'll be on this floor in 5. Nora calculated. They'll take the stairs. Elevators are down. She looked at the team. These were healers. People who had dedicated their lives to fixing, not breaking. They were terrified. Listen to me, Nora said, her voice low and fierce. This is your ICU. You fight for patients every single night against death. This is no different. Death is just wearing boots tonight. She grabbed a handful of saline bags and a bottle of ultrasound gel. We are going to make this hallway the most dangerous place on Earth for anyone trying to walk through it, she said. How? Carver asked. Nora held up the ultrasound gel. Friction reduction, she said, and electricity. She pointed to the defibrillator. A defibrillator delivers 360 joules of electricity. If you discharge it into a puddle of saline on a conductive floor, it's a non-lethal area denial weapon. It won't kill them, but it will drop them. Booby traps? Carver asked, appalled and impressed. That violates every safety code in the book. Tonight the code is survival, Nora said. Jessica, dump the gel at the threshold of the double doors. Mark, strip the wires on the defibrillator paddles. Carver, help me move the heavy equipment. What are we doing with the equipment? We are building a fatal funnel, Nora said, using the military term for a narrow path where the enemy is forced to go, making them vulnerable. They have to come through the main doors. We channel them, we blind them, and then we shock them. As the nurses scrambled to pour the slippery gel and arrange the barricade, Nora knelt beside the Admiral. The improvised ventilator clicked and hissed beside him like a loyal mechanical dog. Hiss. Clack. Whoosh. She checked his pupils. Reactive. He was still in there. Hang on, sir, she whispered. The cavalry is late, but the nurse is on duty. She stood up and took position behind the overturned desk, facing the doors. She held the defibrillator paddles in her hands, the coils whining as they charged. Wait for my command, Nora told the darkness. Nobody moves until they breach. The sound of heavy boots echoed in the stairwell. Thud, thud, thud. They were coming. Dr. Carver stood next to Nora. He was trembling, but he didn't run. He picked up a heavy oxygen tank, holding it like a club. I'm scared, he whispered. Good, Nora said, her eyes fixed on the door handle. Fear makes you sharp. Just don't let it make you freeze. The handle of the ICU doors jiggled, locked. Then a harsh mechanical drilling sound. They were drilling out the lock core. Ready, Nora murmured. Charge to 360. The whine of the capacitor pitched up, screaming in the silent room. 3, 2, 1. The doors burst open. The double doors to the ICU didn't just open. They were kicked inward with a violence that shook the glass walls of the nursing station. 3 figures stormed into the unit. They moved with a terrifying fluid speed, leading with the barrels of suppressed carbines. Their faces were covered by ballistic masks. They weren't looking for drugs. They scanned the room, ignoring the terrified nurses huddled behind the desk, their lasers cutting through the gloom, searching for bed 4. Dr. Carver, crouched behind a heavy cart, stopped breathing. He watched the first man's boot hit the floor. Squelch. Nora had emptied gallons of ultrasound gel and saline onto the linoleum at the entrance. Ultrasound gel is a friction-reducing agent designed to let a probe glide over skin without resistance. On a polished hospital floor, it creates a surface with a coefficient of friction near 0. It is slicker than ice. The lead intruder's boot lost all traction. His center of gravity shifted. His arms flailed, the carbine swinging wild. He went down hard, his back hitting the floor with a bone-jarring thud. The second man, following too close in a tactical stack, tripped over the first. Now! Nora yelled. She wasn't hiding behind the desk. She was kneeling 10 feet away, holding the defibrillator paddles connected to the base unit by coiled wires. She didn't aim at the men. She aimed at the puddle of saline solution that spread out from the gel, pooling around the intruders' bodies. She slammed the paddles onto the wet floor. Clear! Thwack zut! The sound was a dry, heavy crack, like a whip breaking the sound barrier. The 360 joules of electrical energy didn't vanish into the ground. They traveled through the conductive saline, seeking the path of least resistance. That path was the wet tactical gear of the men lying in the puddle. The effect was instantaneous. It wasn't lethal. The current was dispersed across a wide area rather than focused across the heart, but it was incapacitating. The electricity caused immediate violent muscle tetany. Every muscle in the intruders' bodies contracted at once. They seized up, their limbs locking rigid, groaning in guttural agony as their nervous systems were overwhelmed by the surge. The third man, who had hung back just outside the gel zone, raised his weapon toward Nora. Dr. Carver didn't think. He didn't weigh the risks. He just saw the weapon point at the woman who had saved his patients. He swung the oxygen tank. He wasn't a warrior. He was a middle-aged doctor with bad knees. But fear gives you wings. The steel tank connected with the intruder's knee. There was a sickening crunch of cartilage. The man buckled, screaming, his aim thrown off. The bullet shattered the glass of the nursing station, raining shards onto the empty desk. "Get down!" Nora screamed, dropping the paddles and tackling Carver as the man struggled to regain his balance, drawing a secondary weapon. Nora rolled, placing herself between the gunman and Carver. She had no weapon left. The defibrillator was discharging. She braced herself, her scarred arms raised in a futile guard. Then, the window behind the gunman exploded. It wasn't a bullet, it was a man, rappelling from the roof, crashing through the tempered glass in a shower of rain and debris. A figure in black fatigues swung into the hallway. Two more smashed through the adjacent windows. They hit the ground rolling. There were no shouts, no freeze, no movie dialogue. Foot, foot, foot. Three distinct, suppressed sounds. The standing gunman dropped, struck by non-lethal rubber baton rounds to the chest and thigh. He folded like a lawn chair. The room was suddenly filled with 6 operators. They moved with a speed that made the previous intruders look like amateurs. They zip-tied the men on the floor before their muscles had even relaxed from Nora's shock. One of the operators, a giant of a man with a commander patch on his vest, walked straight to Nora. He ignored the groaning intruders. He ignored the doctor. He looked at Nora, then at the improvised pneumatic ventilator still hissing and clacking beside bed 4. Hiss. Clack. Whoosh. He pulled down his mask. He was older, grizzled. "Nice rig, Chief," the commander said, nodding at the machine. "Haven't seen a gravity-driven lung since Somalia." Nora stood up, dusting glass off her scrubs. She didn't salute. She didn't smile. She just exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that released 6 hours of tension. "You're late, Miller," she said. "Traffic was a nightmare." The commander replied dryly. He looked at Admiral Thorne in the bed. "Is the package secure?" "Vital stable," Nora said. He never woke up. Dr. Carver slowly stood up, still clutching the oxygen tank. He looked from the heavily armed soldiers to his night shift nurse. "Chief?" Carver asked, his voice trembling. "He called you Chief?" Nora looked at Carver. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her face pale and her scars stark against her skin. "Chief Petty Officer Nora Kane," the commander answered for her. "Fleet Marine Force Corpsman. Retired. Or, so we thought." The commander tapped his earpiece. "Control. Building secure. Power restoration team is inbound. Assets secured. Medics. Check the hostels." The lights in the hallway flickered. Then, with a solid clunk of heavy relays, the overhead fluorescents buzzed to life. The darkness vanished. The monitors at the station lit up with their familiar bright colors. The real ventilators rebooted, their screens glowing blue, ready to take over from the crude mechanical beast Nora had built. The storm outside was breaking, but inside, the silence was absolute. The staff of the ICU stared at Nora. She wasn't the creepy woman with the scars anymore. She was the reason they were alive. Nora didn't bask in it. She walked over to bed 4, disconnected her makeshift machine, and reconnected the hospital ventilator. She checked the settings, adjusted the PEEP, and smoothed the sheet over the Admiral's chest. "Shift's not over," she said to the room. "Check your patients. We have rounds in 20 minutes." The morning sun hit the glass facade of Harbor Point Medical Center, turning the wet pavement into a mirror. Police cars, military Humvees, and news vans clogged the entrance. The story was already leaking out. A domestic terror cell, a targeted hit on a high-ranking naval intelligence officer, A hospital held hostage by a storm. In the boardroom on the top floor, the mood was somber. Dr. Carver sat at the long mahogany table. His hands were clean, but he could still feel the vibration of the oxygen tank hitting bone. Around him sat the hospital administrator, the board of directors, and the legal team. They were looking for a scapegoat. "The liability is catastrophic," the lawyer was saying, tapping a thick file. "Security protocols failed. The generator failed. We had unauthorized personnel modifying medical equipment. Dr. Carver, you allowed a nurse to hotwire the hospital's electrical grid? That's a violation of 50 different codes." Carver looked down. "It was necessary to save lives." "It was reckless," the administrator countered. "We are lucky the building didn't burn down. We need to distance ourselves from these cowboy tactics. We need to terminate the contract of the employee responsible for the modifications." "Ms. Kane." Carver's head snapped up. "What?" "She's a liability," the administrator said. "She has a history of PTSD, undisclosed combat stress. And now this vigilantism. We'll thank her quietly and let her go. It's for the best." Carver opened his mouth to scream, to flip the table, to tell them they were cowards. But the door opened. He didn't walk in. He rolled in. Admiral Marcus Thorne was in a wheelchair, pushed by Commander Miller. He was pale, hooked up to portable oxygen, but his eyes were sharp as flint. He wore a hospital gown, but he wore it like a dress uniform. The room went silent. The board members scrambled to stand up. "Sit down," Thorne rasped. They sat. Thorne wheeled himself to the head of the table. He looked at the lawyer, then at the administrator. "I heard you were planning to fire my nurse," Thorne said. His voice was weak, but it carried the weight of a carrier strike group. "Admiral, it's a matter of protocol," the administrator stammered. "Protocol," Thorne repeated. He pointed to his chest. "I am alive because that woman ignored protocol. My 20 men in the ICU are alive because she ignored protocol." He leaned forward. "The device she built, that unauthorized modification, it's already being studied by Naval Medical as a field expedient solution for mass casualty events. You aren't firing a liability, you are harboring a genius." Thorne looked at Carver. "And you, Doctor?" Carver swallowed. "Sir? My men told me you took a swing at a gunman with an O2 tank." Thorne cracked a faint smile. "Terrible form, but good effect." Thorne turned back to the board. "If Nora Kane is not employed here tomorrow at double her salary, I will have this hospital declared a restricted no-go zone for all military personnel. You will lose 60% of your patient base overnight. Do I make myself clear?" The administrator turned pale. "Crystal clear, Admiral." "Good." Thorne waved his hand. "Now get out. I want to talk to my team." Later that evening, the parking lot was quiet. Dr. Carver walked to his car. His legs felt heavy. The adrenaline crash was real. He fumbled with his keys, dropping them. As he bent to pick them up, he saw a pair of worn combat boots. He looked up. Nora was leaning against her beat-up truck, smoking a cigarette, a rare vice she allowed herself only after surviving death. "You kept your job," Carver said, standing up. "So I heard," Nora shrugged. "Double pay. Guess I can afford better coffee now." Carver laughed, a short, hysterical sound. "Nora, I don't know what to say. I froze. I panicked. If you hadn't been there—" "You didn't freeze," Nora corrected him. She pushed off the truck and walked over. "You listened. That's harder for a doctor than fighting. Most people with your title would have let their ego kill those patients. You let me lead. That takes guts." Carver looked at her arms. The sleeves of her civilian jacket were rolled up. The scars were there, silver lines in the parking lot lights. "Why?" Carver asked. "With your skills, you could be anywhere. Why a graveyard shift in a civilian hospital? Why empty bedpans?" Nora looked at the hospital building, a massive block of concrete and glass against the night sky. "In the field," she said softly, "my job was to patch people up just enough to send them back to the fight. I saved them so they could go get shot again." She took a drag of the cigarette. "Here, when I save someone, they go home. They go to their kids. They don't go back to war." She smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. It transformed her face, making the scars seem irrelevant. I like the quiet victories, Ethan. They last longer. She dropped the cigarette and crushed it with her boot. See you tonight, doctor. Don't be late for rounds. She got in her truck and drove away. Dr. Carver watched her taillights fade. He looked at his own reflection in the window of his car. He looked tired. He looked older. But he stood a little straighter. He looked back at the hospital. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was a fortress. And he knew that as long as the scarred nurse was walking the halls, the lights would never truly go out.